Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. In the next half hour, then, we'll see what's making the headlines with the former advisor to Nigel Farage and co-owner of Westmonster.com, Michael Heaver, and the former Labour Party advisor, now Evening Standard columnist Ayesha Hazarika. Welcome to both of you. To the front pages, then, let's take a look. The Daily Mirror, to start with, leads with the first picture of Nadeem Mohammed, the man convicted of trying to blow up a Ryanair jet. He's pictured with the explosive device inside the suitcase that he's carrying beside him. The Daily Mail reports that there have been 30,000 illegal attempts to get to the UK from Calais this year. Donald Trump's ominous warning to North Korea makes the front of the Times, the US president vowing to hit Pyongyang with fire and fury. That story also on the front of the Metro, which says a new report suggests Kim Jong-un has the capability to strike Chicago with a nuclear warhead. The Guardian also leading with that story with details that North Korea has succeeded in mounting a nuclear weapon on an intercontinental missile. The Telegraph has a picture of the American country singer Glenn Campbell, who's died at the age of 81. The paper, though, leading with news that stamp duty costs are stopping older homeowners from downsizing. The UK's financial system is at risk of what the Deputy Governor of the Bank of England has labelled a cliff-edge Brexit. That story on the front of the Financial Times. And a month's rain in one day in some parts of Britain. That weather warning from the Environment Agency making the front of the Daily Express. So let's talk more then, shall we, with Ayesha Hazarika and Michael Heaver. And it is to Donald Trump's warnings against North Korea that make the front of many a newspaper, not least the Metro, as you can see. Fire and fury that the world has never seen before. This was these were strong words.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of an extraordinary move. This comes off the back of US intelligence reports, obviously discovering that Pyongyang have been able to develop a small enough missile that, as you said, could get to America. And Trump has retaliated with very, very fiery words, fire and fury. The Metro sums it up as North Korea goes nuclear. Now, we've all known that this has been sort of building up for quite a long time now. We've had reports over the last kind of couple of months of different things being tested. But this is more than just tough talking now. I think people are genuinely worried about where this goes. And the question is it going to escalate? How much is it going to escalate? What is the international community going to do? What can they do? The UN just voted to impose tougher sanctions on North Korea, but I don't think North Korea actually gives two stuffs about the sanctions.
And China finally spoke to North Korea about those sanctions, saying time to take heed, but clearly not.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Donald Trump's showing tremendous leadership with this. A lot of people said that he was going to be sort of an insular president. Actually, he's leading international action on this. And I think the problem is that North Korea is the type of situation that was eventually going to come to a head. Make no mistake, I think with Kim Jong and others, at a time it comes across as almost sort of ridiculous and a bit jokey. This is a regime which is murderous. It's almost like a Nazi regime, basically, with death camps. They kill people. They murder any opposition figures at all. They're sick and they need to be dealt with. And you cannot, I don't think, have, and I'm someone who's been against all the interventions pretty much, Iraq, Libya, all the rest of it. You cannot have this regime with nuclear capability.
So dealt with, what are you talking about there?
Well, you've got to remove the regime. You've got to remove the regime. The Kim Jong-un's regime cannot have nuclear capability.
So do you think Trump should make the first strike then?
I don't think it's about America or Trump. I actually think it's about an international coalition. If you actually look now what China is saying on this, they are being harder and harder. They've been seen to be one of the only allies that North Korea has. And thanks to Trump's sort of efforts with diplomacy, even China now are saying, look, you seriously need to get your house in order. And I just think the whole world, this isn't about America or Trump or anything else, this is about the world looking at this regime with nuclear weapons, and I seriously think, as someone who's been against pretty much every intervention the West has recently made, this is a one-off. This is a Nazi, unhinged regime on the brink of nuclear capability.
I completely disagree with that. I mean, I think this is a terribly difficult sort of situation, but the idea that the world thinks that Donald Trump has shown amazing leadership over this probably is not the case. I think probably people think escalating the rhetoric around this turns this into a very, very dangerous situation for the world. And actually, I don't think there would be a massive consensus in terms of the UN Security Council about necessarily doing a strike, because the thing is, as soon as you strike, where does it end up? Do we want to go into World War III effectively? I don't think that's what the world
Well, the problem
wants.
is you've got conventional weapons trained on Seoul, a city of millions of people, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, look, no one wants World War III, but the fact of the matter is that I think the North Korean regime, if they get a nuclear weapon that's capable of hitting America, may do it. And you can either sit around and wait for them to do that, or you can look ahead. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that you can go in and do strikes America on its own or anything like that. But I think with this particular one-off, you have to seriously consider what would happen if the North Koreans struck the first blow.
The problem is you don't know what you could do. When you say go in for the first strike, that is it. Once you go in, you cross a line and then, like, the jig is up, we're in World War III. And what's interesting is quite a few American defence experts have said that the American defence capability is not up to being able to handle the possibility. So they, although you have Trump talking tough, a lot of the generals and security experts are like, hang on a minute, we don't know if we've got the capability to sort of deal with this if they're, So the first thing that America would have to do is try and actually shore up its defences.
I mean, it feels like we're going back in time to the 1960s. You've got a communist state with nuclear capability able to hit America. I mean, this is a backward step if ever we heard it, isn't it, do you think? It's like...
Yeah, well, look, don't forget, Trump has got quite a few generals and military figures sort of in his administration. So I don't think this is necessarily about Trump charging in. I do think he's showing great leadership. I do think there's an international consensus growing that North Korea is basically out of control. And I agree, this is scary, it's unstable, whatever, but this is not
There is an
away.
argument, though, that generals in power like the idea of a war because it means that their military budgets are bolstered. That, we saw that in the neocon era of Donald Rumsfeld and so on, didn't we? Are you confident that all previous interventions by the international community have worked? And we should have confidence if intervention is likely in North Korea?
No, I think a lot of the West's interventions have been a complete disaster. But I repeat, I think this is a one-off. This is a Nazi-like regime with death camps here in 2017, with serious, looking at having serious nuclear capability. Something has to be done about it, and it shouldn't be an American or anything else. This is an international for humanity to minimise any potential loss of life.
I don't think that's how the international community would see it, because I think the international community would see if you're going to take a decision in the best interest of the world and humanity, you have to try and go in and do as much diplomacy as possible and avoid going in and escalating this, because once that line is crossed, you don't go back from it. And you're absolutely right about what a horrible regime it is, but let's be honest, there's lots of other horrible regimes around the world that nobody wants to touch with a barge pole now, because, as you said, people don't like the idea of intervention.
Yeah.
So I think all of this is a really, really difficult position.
Is it possible at this stage to take a step back, possibly via the Chinese, for example, not have those preconditions which America is demanding before talks could start? Do you think this language means you cannot take that step back to allow diplomacy to continue?
I think Donald Trump, he's a successful businessman. He's looked at this and thought, this is a problem. But his approach is results. And I think he's coming to the mind now that this cannot go, and that's something has to be done.
How do you think running Miss Universe is like a good training ground for sorting out
Donald Trump just turned over the entire...
And like The Apprentice, you're fired, literally, I'm firing a nuclear weapon over
the thing is, you can belittle him, but the American people just voted for him to be their president, so that's a bit disrespectful. And the fact is that Trump now, I think, is going to deliver results. The international consensus is growing. And by the way, I don't think this has to turn into World War III. Actually, I don't think the North Korean regime has much support. And if you took out the top few hundred of that regime who basically brutalised their people, I think you would find most North Koreans would be on the side for moving to something a little bit less harsh, where they're not having family members killed for opposing the regime. So, I don't think there's mass support in North Korea for this. If you take out the top people, I think the country will change quite radically.
I don't think there's mass support for the Americans just steaming in without a proper plan and without international
No, it has to be an international support, yeah.
But I just don't think that. I don't think we're in that zone at the moment.
Well, maybe not, but I think Trump's taken a lead in it, and I think that's a positive thing.
OK, well, we'll see what happens next with that story. I think it's progressing daily almost, isn't it? Moving to the Financial Times, the story you have picked is Google sacking an engineer over a memo claiming that women are less suited to tech jobs. Who'd like to start?
Well, this has been a huge story. I mean, Google prides itself on, do no evil and try and be a good company and everything like that. it's got a big issue in the sense that it's a pretty male-dominated company because it's tech, and they are trying very hard to kind of give the impression.
You've just said
that,
because it's tech. That's almost the same as what
sure,
you just
but
said.
I mean, there is an issue there, and they have been trying. I mean, I've actually gone in and done talks about diversity at Google. But what this memo showed was classic sort of, groupthink about, okay, women can't do certain jobs. He was talking about their temperament. He was saying that some women find sort of stressful situations very difficult to sort of deal with. They're better suited to softer jobs, more artistic jobs, people jobs, that kind of thing. Coding is sort of not really for them. And that just is a ridiculously outdated way of thinking. And for a company which is so important in society, I mean, Google is a verb now, it's part of our everyday life, it has got to do more in terms of proving gender equality. It's incredibly old-fashioned, and this guy who's been sacked, I think it's right that he's been sacked. I'm sure the White House might hire him. I think Donald Trump probably likes the cut of his jib, but it's a big problem now.
He was arguing, though, that Google was putting political considerations, i.e. being PC, ahead of the interests of its business as it tried to hire more women into jobs, i.e. if they're not best qualified, employ someone who is best qualified if you want to be a world leader. Is there any argument in that still in this world or not?
Yeah, I think it was an interesting document. He said things like, well, that career preference comes into this. There are certain industries that are more female dominated. That's just a fact. And actually, ironically, the memo was entitled Google's Ideological Echo Chamber, which they've kind of proven his point, which was we're now turning into this monolithic society in the West where anyone that dares speak out and say anything that's slightly away from the norm, that makes people debate and talk about what's going on in these industries, is sacked. There's no dissent allowed. And where does that leave us? There probably are some people in the company that agree with him. He says that they've messaged him and they're too sort of scared to speak out. I think at the end of the day, whether you agree or disagree with this, Western society is slowly turning into a zone where you cannot put out different diverse ideas. You've basically got to adhere to this corporate culture, and not only, if you go against it, you lose your job. Why can't we have debates on this? If he's putting forward a sensible set of ideas, why don't you criticise it?
3,500 word internal memo. He thought it through. It wasn't just rushing out.
Just because he's thought it through and he's done a wordy memo saying that women are too soft and emotional to do the big jobs, I don't think that's okay. And quite frankly, if you look at the statistics of where power lies in every sector of society, politics, the media, law, tech, it is dominated by white men. And unless that narrative ever changes, then you're not ever going to get equality. And the idea that women don't have the temperament or the intelligence or the aptitude to code in the same way as men, it's like saying at one point, at one point they didn't have female newsreaders reading out serious stories because it was actually thought that the timbre of their voice meant that they couldn't convey serious messages, and that was not that long ago.
You're pressing my buttons now, aren't you? Right, got to take a break. Lots more to pack in. Back in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me this evening, the former Labour advisor to Harriet Harman and Ed Miliband, Ayesha Hazarika. This is a long list. And the former advisor to Nigel Farage and now co-owner of Westmonster.com, Michael Heaver. And now you are also Evening Standard columnist. Anyway, am I done? Where are we going now? OK, top of the Times, shall we? Stop and search. It's coming back, is it?
Well, it's an interesting one. I mean, for Westminster, I've been covering the sort of spate of knife crime going on in London at the moment. I mean, it's horrendous.
And acid attacks.
And acid attacks and shootings as well, by the way. So a couple of weeks ago, in one borough alone in London, there were 3 stabbings and 2 shootings from a Friday to Monday period. I mean, this is a problem that's really getting worse. And I think, for Sadiq Khan and Theresa May, they've both sort of boasted in the past that they've sort of limited stop and search. And I think the proof's in the pudding. We're seeing violent crime go up across the board, and I think Amber Rudd coming out and basically saying that we need to increase this and that it needs to go forward and bring it back is the right thing to do. I think you just look at the horrendous wave of violence going across London. I mean, it's pretty much unprecedented. Shootings, stabbings, acid attacks. I think a lot of people are worried, and I think Sadiq Khan talks about things like YouTube videos and all the rest of it, which are quite abstract. This is on the ground policing, and I think people need to be reassured in London. I really do.
So I think stop and search is always a very thorny issue. I used to work at the Home Office back in the day around the time of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and certainly there was definitely a fear and a genuine concern that stop and search was disproportionately being used against black people, and the way it was done was not being kind of fair. I think the police need to have whatever powers they need, particularly with these horrific acid attacks and these knife attacks, as Michael's been saying. Interesting, one of the things that the police say that they need as a new power is the ability to go after younger people, because there are a lot of kids on these like mopeds, and they're worried about how to go after them because they're minors and they don't have the... So I think everything needs to be looked at, and how these laws are kind of meted out has got to be fair. Like, you have to do it in a way which is fair across, you know, anyone, and you just don't sort of segment
and be
people.
seen to be fair.
Yeah, exactly. But I think if clearly the safety of people is vital with all these horrendous attacks, and they do need to have the right tools, but they need to be used fairly, and as you said, to be seen to be used fairly.
To the Telegraph now, a story on the right-hand column, if we catch that. Prosecutors told to dig into an accused rapist's past. Why has this caught your eye?
So this caught my eye. This is Alison Saunders, who's the Director of Public Prosecutions, has said that this should be looked at, mainly because rape convictions are still very, very low. So the latest statistics are that there were sort of around 23,000 rape allegations, and only 3,000 of those ended in conviction. It has a very stubborn, low rate of conviction. And often these are cases where when somebody rapes somebody, it's often not just a one-off offence. Quite often they will have a propensity and a history about it, and when it's known, other victims will come out. There was a couple of famous cases in London over the last decade or so, Warboys and Reed. They were taxi drivers, and actually when the Metropolitan Police looked into it, there was actually a clear picture of evidence, and it just wasn't properly put together. So this will be controversial, but I think it's really important. You know, we've got to do more to get these convictions up.
Yeah, look, I do think that the rape conviction is a complete disgrace. I mean, look at the figures, and I do think that something needs to be done about it. My only worry would be with this is you're then looking at sort of previous sexual behaviour. It's almost, you know, how do you know that the allegations that are being put on this the sort of individual are correct themselves? And that's what I sort of think society's sort of sinister, is how do you verify the claims that are being made about these people, or are you only including things they've been convicted of? Because, of course, you know, to have someone convicted on the basis of evidence that hasn't in itself been proven, to me, seems like a bit of a slippery slope. But I do agree that if you look at rape convictions, something has to be done on this, because it is a disgrace, and I think a lot of women are being failed
justice. The danger
justice.
is you haven't got a long-term partner, therefore it looks in court like you have more sexual partners, therefore that looks sinister to whoever, and that's the sort of point you're raising.
Yeah, and I think the whole idea that someone's behaviour, of which they've not been convicted or actually broken the law potentially, feeds into them getting convicted after an allegation of rape.
I'm moving on, because we haven't
thing.
got very long, and I know this is obviously a subject close to everyone's heart, which is the warning of a cliff edge Brexit. And this is to stability of what? The banking industry, or generally across the...
They're saying across the banking industry generally. This is the Bank of England, the sort of the Prudential Regulation Authority, basically saying, look, what's going to happen with jobs? There's a real worry that if there isn't a sufficiently long transition period, then people will leave. The idea of loss of passporting. Already the Royal Bank of Scotland, Japan's biggest bank, last week said that they would expand to open their bases in Amsterdam in the event of a hard Brexit. So I think what this feeds into is really the Chancellor's plea for a slightly longer transition period to just give people some time.
I've run out of time to hear your thoughts on this, which is a disaster. I know. Terrible timing. Shall we do that one next time?
Let's do it.
At 11:30.
You can go first.
I know, yes. Start the programme with it. Michael Heaver and Ayesha Hazarika, thank you. Let's check out the weather.